This is episode 18. I'm no Chauvidly, of course. Until I didn't know this. Yep. Okay. Alright, I got a lot of things to do, and try to figure out this from right here. Okay. I'm supposed to be around here for some reasons. If I was gonna consume, of course. Until I didn't know this, right? Well, if I consume, of course. Until I didn't notice. Okay? Fine. Okay, whew. Alright. Let's see, Oh, okay. Well, I got a lot of things to do. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep, okay. Okay. Well, it's supposed to be here. It's supposed to be there. For some reasons. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep, of course. Okay. Well, I got a lot of things to do. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. Okay. Alright. I got to figure out what to do eventually. Until I didn't notice. Yep. Okay. So I might be around here for some reasons. If I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. If I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume, really. Of course. I'm not sure where it was at. Yep. If I assume, really. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume, really. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. Okay. I need to make sure, because for some reasons, and I have no idea. Yep, if I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep, if I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice, right? If I assume, right? Of course. Until I didn't notice. If I assume. Okay, I was gonna make sure where was that. For some reasons, and I have no idea. Of course, I'm not sure visually. Because I am not sure where was that. Yep. If I assume visually. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume visually. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume visually. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume visually. Of course. Not sure where else that to flee. Until I didn't notice. If I assume, right? Of course. Until I didn't notice. I know, right? If I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume, really. Of course. I'm not sure definitely. If I assume. Of course. I'm not sure where that's at. For some reasons. Okay. I'm not sure for some reasons. And I was gonna make sure, right? Okay. I did not point that. Of course. Until I didn't notice. if I assume. Yep. Until I didn't notice. No, right? If I assume. Of course. No sure where was that, isn't? If I assume. Yep. If I assume, Julie. Of course. Because I'm not sure visually. Until I didn't notice. Yep, if I assume Julie. Of course. Until I didn't notice, right? If I assume Julie. Of course. I'm not sure I realized that. For some reasons. If I assume. Until I didn't notice, right? Of course. I'm not sure visually. Until I didn't notice. If I assume, right? Until I get some ideas. Of course. I'm not sure visually. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. If I assume, right? If I assume, right? Of course. Until I didn't notice, right? Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume, of course. Until I didn't notice. Yep. If I assume, Julie. Of course. The show realizes that, isn't? Nope. If I assume. Of course. Until I didn't notice. No, right? Yep. If I assume. Of course. I know, right? If I assume, right? Eventually. Of course. Till I didn't notice. Yep.